Thank you all for being here on this almost completely beautiful spring afternoon for our third meeting of Kentucky's Judicial Commission on Mental Health. And before we get started with our meeting, I would ask that those of you who are here for your first commission meeting in person to please introduce yourself, and then we'll start with our Zoom participants who are here for their first meeting to introduce themselves. So let's see, I will start with the Zoom participant, or excuse me, the in-person participants to my left in the room who are here for their first meeting to introduce themselves. Anyone on the my left-hand side who are here for the first meeting?
I am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Jim Anderson with the Kentucky Association. This is the two prior, but the first in person.
Anyone else?
Justice Lambert. My name is Brian Hubbard. I'm the Chair and Executive Director of the Kentucky Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission. I guess I am a member in waiting on this occasion. It's good to see everybody.
Good afternoon, I'm Stephanie Craycraft, and I'm the Interim Commissioner for the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. Glad to be here today. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Becky Frost. I am the Facility Director for Western State Hospital.
Okay, I think that takes care of our in-person first-timers. Anyone here for the first time on Zoom? I think I see someone. Yes.
I am Joe Ross. I am the Logan County Attorney, and I am the representative of one of the representatives of the Kentucky County Attorneys Association.
Hi, I'm Connie Milligan. I'm the Clinical Director for the Fayette Mental Health Court run by Judge John Tackett.
And I'm unable to see that far to tell that.
That one's Richard.
That's all I have. All right, and to kick us off today, I'm going to provide some updates on the status of the commission since we left off in December. First and foremost, we are very excited that we're going to host our summit at the Golf House in May 31st through June the 2nd, and this has been a massive undertaking, as you can imagine. We're working hard to finalize those details, and I would like to especially thank those of you who are participating in the Summit Planning Committee and our administrator extraordinaire, the fabulous Shauna Mitchell. Dang, she's been wonderful. Registration for the event went out to commission members about 3 weeks ago on March the 3rd. And if you have not already signed up, please do so. Judicial registration was released this week, and tomorrow all of you will receive an additional email to share the registration more widely with your agencies and identified partners. But this part is very important. We ask you to strategically, and I emphasize strategically, I have in my notes underlined in red, strategically promote this registration to potential attendees to select groups of people that may most benefit from the summit, rather than sending out a mass email to invite everybody. Because we want to ensure that attendance is multidisciplinary and balance. We want an even arrangement of all the roles in the system. And that's not to be picky, but it kind of is picky in the sense that we want it to be, we want all groups represented and all organizations represented that we touch. Since the solutions that we're striving for require a cross-agency collaboration for us to succeed, and we've got, well, you know, we're obviously faced with a hard cap on how many people can attend. So your very strategic invitations will play a crucial role in how successful this is going to be. And we're very excited with the tagline that the Summit team has come up with. I think you'll like it too. It's bringing solutions to Kentucky courts and communities with compassion and hope. So I'll say that again. Bringing solutions to Kentucky courts and communities with compassion and hope. And with that said, we have some more exciting news to share about the progress toward the summit. Some of you all have heard this gentleman speak. We booked Sam Keone, the author of Dreamland and The Least of Us, to speak at a plenary session and share his experience as a journalist covering substance use disorders and the growth of that across our nation. And in addition to that plenary session with Mr. Keone, we're going to be holding several other concurrent sessions, and there's going to be several breakout sessions with 12 of them running at the same time, to be repeated 5 times over the course of the first 2 days. We've already confirmed a number of speakers for these sessions, and we're excited about those as well. We're still in search of a powerful, inspirational speaker to conclude the summit. If you have recommendations, please send those to Shauna as soon as possible. I know you all have her email address, right? So be sure and get those ideas to her, especially if that said inspirational speaker is free, right, Shauna? Or very inexpensive. We would love that. A small group, including myself, went to the Golf House on March the 10th for a site visit, and we were very impressed with the space. I had no idea there were so many rooms at the Golf House for meeting space, and that we were going to need all that space. And so we've been preparing for all those technical details that go into it, including all the audio visual things that take place. I've never been involved with a meeting so large as this is going to be. I'm very excited, and I think you will be too. The pieces are coming together, and I think it's going to be a huge success. Lastly, for the summit, I want to say that there's a great deal of planning going into the exhibit hall for the summit. And I don't understand all this, but Shauna understands it very well. In order to ensure that we're following the appropriate procurement rules, the exhibit hall spots will be bid on by interested parties. The advertisement will be posted on the Kentucky Court of Justice website for bid submission. And when that's confirmed, you'll receive an additional email with those details, which you can share as you deem appropriate. And I would just like to take a moment to recognize Secretary Friedlander and the Department of Behavioral Health for their direct partnership in summit planning. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you so much, Secretary Friedlander. We could not do this summit without all of the partners that have been involved. And it's just been an amazing partnership to work with that department and all the other folks that have been involved. It's amazing, and all the things that have been going on over these months. I think we're all going to see it on the ground when the summit comes together. And speaking of that, we also participated in NAMI's Advocacy Day, Ms. Cunningham, which was held on March the 8th at the State Capitol Rotunda. The attendees came with a strong message of never be afraid to ask for help, and it was very much a privilege to speak alongside current and former Kentucky legislators and the Lieutenant Governor. We saw Senator Alice, or former State Senator Alice Gordon Kerr receive an award for her support for mental health causes in the General Assembly. And Dr. Sheila Schuster also received an award for her work as a longtime practicing psychologist. And we want to thank Ms. Melanie Cunningham for her work and her leadership with NAMI. Thank you very much. Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman spoke about the Student Mental Health Initiative that she is very much leading and enthusiastic about, that works with students, school districts, administrators, teachers, and parents. And we hope to be able to have a group, she and others, present in a breakout session at the summit on that topic. So now as to our work groups. System mapping groups, I think there's been a decision made. Shauna and others have come to a decision that perhaps that group may need to be dissolved because it's sort of duplicative. And they decided to dissolve themselves, and in an effort to make their work more efficient, multiple work groups have already been working on system mapping, and they did not want to be duplicative. So those folks that were working on that committee are going to be absorbed into other committees. Did I get that right, Ms. Administrator? All right. We have mapped out the criminal justice system with the National Center for State Courts as a commission at large. The Juvenile Justice Work Group has developed a novel format of an online system mapping and a step-by-step process which is about to begin. Terry Deal of the National Council for State Courts is leading that change to develop a program that targets each member's unique area of expertise. And additionally, the Dependency, Abuse, and Neglect Work Group has begun on Upstream, which will comprise system mapping for the child welfare system. Several meetings have already taken place, and we're excited to see where it goes. And that's one of the things we're excited to see where it goes. That's kind of the whole concept of this very new part of what we're doing here. We're on the ground floor of this mental health project, and every time I talk about what we're doing, I express to people that I'm excited to see where it goes, and that's a minor part or a smaller part of the whole process, but I'm excited to see where all of this goes. With these processes already underway, we believe that the system mapping work group, again, should be dissolved, but each of those members, please get involved with another work group that suits your interest and your passion. This sequential intersect model mapping took place here on February the 16th and 17th here at AOC, and that event brought together stakeholders from across the state to learn from each other and collaborate on solutions for Kentucky's criminal justice system. Day one began with a presentation from the National Center for State Courts. Michelle O'Brien told each person in the room to write down their doubts or hesitation about the event and stuff them away in their pockets, and to place them to the side for the 2 days to follow. And then she explained to them how the event would take place, and each table congregated around a specific topic, armed with markers and poster paper for later that day. There was then a presentation from Jason Reynolds regarding Kentucky's data on mental health and criminal justice. And the data clarified things for everyone in the room, but it also brought up more questions that led to a productive conversation. Some examples of questions which require discussions are how the state can do a better job of tracking trauma in the future, as well as how we need to gather data from the perspective of the family unit. Additionally, there was concern that more integration was needed between the mental health and substance use pieces. of the conversation and a common theme for the event surrounding the data was the question of how we can bring ourselves to share our data more effectively between the agencies. And then there was obviously a lot of discussion about pre-arrest diversions, how to connect individuals with services without involving them in the justice system, what gaps exist, what funding streams are available, making sure that the services that were offered were the highest quality possible, etc. The goal was to address the complex nature of the legal system and to make informational guides as simple and as easy to follow as possible. The last update I will provide is that Letcher County, where is my judge? There we go, Judge Mullins. Letcher County was selected as one of the 5 pilot sites to implement the Judge's Guide to Mental Health Diversion. The program is a collaborative effort between the National Center for State Courts and the local court. The program stems from the National Judicial Task Force to examine state courts' response to mental illness, which is the same task force that published State Courts Leading Change. You have access to both materials in your folder for today's meeting. I encourage you to review those documents as they contain many guiding principles on why the commission was formed. Basically, our foundational materials for why we formed. And we're very excited this program is going to begin, and certainly applaud Judge Mullins and his court for being named a pilot site and for his continued support for the commission. Judge Mullins. We're now ready to hear from the committee chairs, and before we do, I must say that, you know, I continue to watch these committee groups work from afar, but I don't attend very many, if any, of their meetings, even by Zoom. I watch these emails come across and hear a little bit of their work remotely. The real work is being done by our committees, and I take little to no credit for their work, except to cheerlead them on, and I must say how proud I am of you all and the work you're doing before we get started. So first up is Judge Tackett for the criminal justice update.
Well, good afternoon. I apologize. I am a poor substitute for Judge Mayer, who is our chair, but she couldn't be here with us today due to training that she's undergoing. So you got me. So at any rate, I want to advise everyone that we recently met as a group on March the 13th and to discuss updates that you're going to hear from our various leads today. And then we had a wonderful legislative update from Nathan Goins, who provided us some information about what is currently pending or as far as bills to be passed, and then we discussed next steps. So I'm going to mostly turn it over to the leads of our work groups to discuss the work that they've been doing. And so I'm going to ask that Judge Jones start for juvenile justice.
So for juvenile justice, our first meeting was for introductions and conversations, and we found ourselves focused on barriers to accessing juvenile treatment for mental health and for substance abuse. Things we brought up were lack of qualified personnel to fill positions that were open, employee turnover, a lack of placement options for youth, and a lack of communication and collaboration among the stakeholders. From there, we narrowed it down to 3 focus areas. The first was our collaboration and communication plan. So in your packets, you have this document, which is the work product from that focus area. So I can't be showing my age here, but we are presently miles beyond where we were in the early 2000s. At that time, AOC, DJJ, DCBS, DBHID, and all the other agencies that are represented here today were so siloed, no one in those agencies even had someone from the other agency's phone number, much less shared data or held meetings like we're here today. So we've come a long way, but there still is a long way to go. So our communication and collaboration plan, it's a front and back. If you look at it, it looks like common sense, but it's a reminder for every agency, every provider, every person working with the child that they need to reach out, that they need to ask the child and the family questions such as, who else is working with you? Who's helped you before? Who do you trust? To ask these questions, to write down the answers, and then to keep them where they can be quickly accessed. So no worker, no child, no family feels like they're going through it alone in a tough situation. Our second focus area was SIM mapping. So sequential intercept mapping has never been done before in the juvenile justice system. We're working with the National Center for State Courts to guide us in the process, and Kentucky is the pilot site for this group. We're also looking for a really cool name like Upstream, so if anyone's got some ideas, we're happy to take those on. We're going to try and do this virtually. So for those of you who participated in the mapping event for the adult system, you gathered here for 2 full-day, all-day meetings. We're going to be sending out polls to the members of our work group and to stakeholders before we begin mapping each individual intercept point. And then we'll be having a virtual meeting to review the data from the poll. And the results are going to be hopefully several meetings, approximately 2 hours each, virtually, to do a deep dive into each intercept point and get each point mapped. The challenge is that so many individual counties or cities or areas have amazing programs for intervention and for prevention, but these aren't available statewide. So the purpose of our mapping event is trying to make sure that everybody knows what services are available statewide and where we have gaps in the system and how to build up those services where there are gaps. Excuse me. Our third focus area was on the juvenile involuntary hospitalization statutes. So these laws have been on the books without revision, I think, since the 1980s. We sent a poll to all juvenile and family court judges, and Todd Stetler here with AOC also pulled the data showing how many times in each catchment area, and I think he was doing that by our community mental health provider areas, those statutes have been utilized. What we found is that out of all the judges we sent the polls to who responded, only one judge claimed to be very familiar with those statutes. Nowhere in the entire state is the law used very often, and in most areas it's used less than once a year. So we asked the judges the follow-up question, what keeps them from using this statute? Big answer was no beds, no resources, no placement options. Other responses were no one in my area is familiar with this. We also asked, so what are you doing instead of using the statute? Detention is often an answer. Many judges, many law enforcement still believe that detention is a gateway to services. Also, with no beds are available, the statute allows that you can send a child to detention instead of sending a child who's in need of hospitalization to a hospital. And then again, no resources available in my area. Another thing that we found was being done commonly is surrender of custody by families to DCBS to try and get children's services under dependency statutes. So our work group had an intense discussion on the topic, and that's led to more questions, such as how does this area of the law function differently than 202A, which is the adult involuntary hospitalization statutes? Where are the juvenile hospitals in Kentucky, and why are there so few? And such questions like, is this not like an ER? How can a patient who's a danger to themselves or others be turned away and told there are no beds? Who pays for the services for a child who's involuntarily hospitalized? Who decides how long a child who's hospitalized stays? Is it the provider or is it the insurance company? Are there less restrictive options? What happens if a parent objects to hospitalization? Is detention ever the best option? And what resources do they need at a detention facility to help these children and to help keep the child and the staff safe? So we're now planning a panel of providers from juvenile hospitals, from ERs, from law enforcement, CDWs, Medicaid, and from our adult hospitalization facilities to go even deeper into looking at these areas and to answering these questions and begin identifying areas of law, procedure, practice, or training that we need to build on, follow through on, or change. That's all.
Thank you so much, Judge Jones. The next work group is headed by Director Colleen Slusher regarding competency. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Director Slusher.
Rest.
Hi, everybody. So the first competency work group was held on March 9th, but we started the process of the work group by meeting with the judges from the commission, and we did that on February 23rd. And the purpose of that was to talk just about KCPC, what competency looks like now, the evaluation and the restoration process. And a bulk of what our discussion was about the flexible orders many of you have heard us talk about before. So we explored those as a group. We talked about some judges' concerns about what that looks like in terms of process and what it could look like in the future and some next steps that they were going to advise us on as part of that work. That moved into the actual work group meeting on the 9th, where we had lots of good discussion, again, about what KCPC's role is in a larger continuum of care. So providing good information about how our state hospitals and our KCPC are actually tied together. And so the misdemeanor process for competency and treatment and restoration and the felony side are actually all connected. And so making sure that people on that work group really understand the larger system. So if you have a point of intervention, it really kind of affects a patient who would walk through each step of that process. We have a technical assistance provider through the Council on State Governments who has written a document called Just and Well, which many of you have probably seen. There's 10 strategies as part of that document, and each one of them is something we've actually talked about as being an important element to look towards the future on about what competency looks like. So it's really good to see that from a national lens and know that a lot of other states are dealing with similar issues and learning from them about next steps that Kentucky needs to take. And a big focus of what they strategize and recommend are outpatient evaluation processes and treatment. So it really aligns with the work that we're trying to push as a facility and a larger system like all of us are working towards. So we had some talk about, again, the misdemeanor process, how it ties in. Using those kind of flexible orders will actually affect those systems as well. Judge Phillips talked about her experience with using some of the flexible orders and finding that to be a positive experience. And so that's been really helpful for judges to explain what their experience has been so others can learn from that. We talked about the outpatient evaluation process, though it is strategic to help people move through the system. It also is a part of aligning with national practice. So we want to make sure that message is clear to people that it's not just a temporary solution, it's part of our long-term goals. And that the way that we modify the system through the Council of State Governments technical assistance will help us is looking at policy development from other states and how we can implement that here in Kentucky. And then we heard from Western State Hospital, Dr. Redmond Vaught gave some good real life examples about what the system looks like from the hospital perspective. So if someone leaves the judicial system because they've been found incompetent, how they move into that state process with the state hospital system. So that's always helpful for people to hear. We identified some areas that we've reported on before with Judge Burke and Dr. Sussman. I talked about TIMS law, so assisted outpatient treatment, how that's part of this system. And so as part of that sequential intercept model, thinking about how there are different points on the continuum that affect the people who go through competency as well. It's a much larger system. So we talked a lot about AOT, TIMS law here in Kentucky, and the purpose of it and how it can provide some services at the beginning of someone walking through the behavioral health system and then the criminal justice system, and on the outside of that when they're going back and reentry services through DOC. And so we had, I think, 12 people who attended that. So we're really excited about where the next steps are. And we identified some action items. Again, since we've only met once, we don't have a work product yet. But our action items include looking at the judicial recommendations on promoting the orders that I talked about, creating a work plan to guide the tasks of the work group, again, partnering with the Council on State Governments for technical assistance. AOC has given us a lot of good data, so we were going to deep dive into that to see what we can learn from there. And then, of course, creating, as part of our work plan, some information on TIMS law. And then something that definitely comes up that I know Judge Leach is concerned about is medication in jails. So we really want to explore that. While it's outside the scope of KCPC, so if someone leaves KCPC and goes back to the jail while they await their next hearing, that medication part, in terms of forced treatment or providing medication from a jail perspective, is beyond KCPC, but I feel like it's part of our work to help someone flow through the system really well, not decompensate and not have to come back into a facility, but be able to move through the system in a clean way. So that's part of the conversation because it's part of that larger system of care. Have any questions for me? Okay.
Thank you so much, Director. Last is the pre-arrest diversion subcommittee, and that is headed by Jim Daly and Joe Ross, and I believe they're both participating by Zoom. So either one of those gentlemen are ready to, looks like Mr. Ross is. So I'll let you take it away, Mr. Ross.
Yeah, I can get us started, and Jim can always chime in and correct me if I say anything wrong. So I welcome him to do that. Our group met for the first time at the end of February. We pre-arrest mainly focused on matters relating to involuntary hospitalization. We have some law enforcement representatives on there, and I'll say that their comments and my experiences with my local law enforcement were very similar. They're fully willing to take people in on mental health warrants rather than arrests whenever they have the appropriate level of probable cause. Unfortunately, with what that standard is, a lot of times those people are released, so they often will have multiple contacts with an offender through that, but ultimately they often end up in the system just because of lack of services to follow up with those mental health issues once they are released from a mental health warrant. So we focused a lot of our time on addressing barriers to treatment for the people who are initially detained. That's the way I was looking at the diversion aspect of that, is how do we focus on the people who are in the jails, getting them qualified for some sort of a diversion. Our group was mainly focusing on the felony diversion programs, and we have a little bit more work to do on that. I am the only prosecution representative on this panel at this point, so I think one thing we left for the future to do would be to add some more members so that we can get a little bit more diversity and a little bit more information on that. And our hope is to have some Commonwealth attorneys or assistant Commonwealth attorneys to participate on that so they can discuss the specifics of a circuit court diversion program. I am from a county of about 30,000 people. We're right next to Warren County, so I kind of represent the more rural communities, but recognize there are many that are much more rural than mine. So I think our issues can be somewhat different in the various communities. One thing I think you're going to hear with a lot of these programs, a lot of what I'm going to say, I heard with the juvenile justice report, a lot of the issues come down to just services being available, having enough qualified, competent counseling options, staffing of those agencies so that you kind of have wraparound care where they might get assistance whenever they are first referred somewhere, but due to funding or lack of positions, there's often turnover in those positions. Another big thing that we wanted to focus on had to do with insurance with people who are in custody and identifying issues relative to Medicaid, when that cuts off, when somebody is in jail, what are the possibilities of getting them on it while they are in jail and about to get out so that they can actually comply with a diversion program, because unfortunately a lot of our offenders aren't able to pay out of pocket. So you've almost got a chicken or an egg situation of how do they get out of jail to do the program and be in compliance with their probation if they can't get the insurance to comply until they get out of jail. I think that that was a big part of it, though, just access to services and having services available. Jim, you want to chime in with anything from your perspective?
Sure, thank you. I think that was great. So I have to be honest, I think I'm finally starting to get my head wrapped around this just a little bit. And it, um, it just becomes more apparent to me every day that a lot of these issues and a lot of these problems all begin at the jail because that's where they're all brought to. And let me step back 1 minute. I've got Dr. Meyer that works for me here at Campbell County, and his whole job is to set up and put together a mental health program for us in his spare time. He also runs our drug program, but he's here with me. I asked him to join so he can give us some ideas maybe going forward. But to drop back again, the truth of the matter is by the time they get to jail, it's probably too late. Because what we see is they come here and unless they're in severe shape, they usually end up staying here, 48 hours or 72 hours or longer, depending on, of course, the charges. And during that period of time, which may seem short to us, they've lost their job, they've lost their income, maybe they've lost their family because of whatever they're here for. So it really is the impetus of trying to find a solution is to find that solution either immediately upon their entry into a detention facility or before they get here. And I would love to tell you that I have an answer for that. And although there's been discussion on that, I don't think that is an easy answer. And again, Joe, in your rural community, I would tell you that, my county's 92,000 plus. I'm right next door to Kenton and just a little bit away from Boone, and then of course right across from Cincinnati. And we all have those same problems here. The services just aren't available, and the funding for those services just aren't available. We each have different ones at some of our facilities, but not all of them at each facility. So maybe a sharing process, and maybe that would help some of the inconsistencies that we're dealing with and the funding that we're dealing with. We talked to, and I think Angie was talking about it, the Angel program, which I am completely at a blank on, but alternatives to jail, apparently that is one. And again, I think a big key is if we can have these programs in line before we bring them into jail, or at least within maybe a 12-hour period, because once they're here for a day or so, bad things start happening to people's lives. The criminal charges, we talked about that as well. Those can really be dealt with from a myriad of angles, but it's getting them back to their livelihood and their families that's going to keep them from crashing quickly. We talked about the deflection, and if and when police show up, that's often seen as a negative and maybe too late. I hope that's not the case. This again, those of you that know me, I've been in this stuff for 46 years now, many years as a police officer. And back in my day, and I hope today, policemen recognize people that have those issues and they look for alternatives. So hopefully part of our discussions will be maybe retraining ourselves and training the new people to look for people that have these issues. And here in Campbell, we have mental health workers at several of the jails, several of the police departments, and they have mental health people working with them every day. We try to take advantage of that. And I was sitting here the other day, and it really wouldn't hurt a thing. And I'm seriously considering maybe partnering with some of my police departments that have these folks and having, of course, I have to find funding for it, but that shouldn't be too big of a problem. But having a mental health person at the jail that is familiar with these sources and resources to help move those people out of here as quickly as possible, because as soon as we can get them help, the better. The quicker we can get them help, the better. About that. I was looking through the old notes on this, Joe. But really, from a jail's perspective, I think those are the main areas and the areas where we need to look for alternatives. And again, I'm very lucky in North Kentucky, or in Campbell County particularly. Our judges are very cognizant of these issues and they work well. And we had one come in yesterday, again, in serious condition. Well, bad alcoholic, was in withdrawals when they came in within hours, worse shape. And we worked with our judges and got this individual out of here. Instead of taking them out and dropping them on the street, we have a process where we automatically take them to a jail, or to a hospital, and get them in help and hopefully out of crisis right away. So hopefully all of our jails, and I think, the other thing you have to remember is in Kentucky, I can say, and as president, I don't carry any weight, right? I can say that we need to do all these things, but you have to remember, locally, we have to be able to sail all of this because you have 72 full-service jails in the state, every one with a different jailer. And although we do agree on a lot of things, we don't agree on everything. And some of them don't have the same abilities for funding and the availability of services that I do, that Joe talked about in the more rural areas. I have more services available here in Kenton and Boone as well.
Yeah, I think our common barrier that our committee is going to continue to butt up against throughout the remainder of our time will just be that source of funding for adding services. Right now, the way kind of my perspective on at least what I see is we have the funding for the most serious problems, which oftentimes turn into the ones who are actually in court. In order to really do the pre-arrest stuff, we're going to have additional funding and additional people there to meet those needs. I'll say our committee probably does need to address some of the other issues that were touched on with other programs such as Casey's Law and Tim's Law. That would be a pre-arrest issue where these things can be dealt with. However, in dealing with the Casey's Law cases that I have at my office, frequently the problem is the petitioner being able to find somebody who's willing and able to do that, how to get that paid for. And, I've even spoken with my judge who, he'll take any takers. He just doesn't really have a whole lot of options in that regard. So every time we want to add programs like Casey's Law and Tim's Law, it's great. But we also need to add to the pool of people who are qualified and capable of servicing those needs. So I know AOC doesn't doesn't do funding for the state, but that is something that we would need our legislature to partner with us with to expand those services.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'll take a cue from Director Slusher and just put it out there. Does anyone have any questions for the Criminal Justice Committee or any of our leads particularly? If not, that's our report. Yes.
Thank you very much. It was very exciting to hear of all the work that's being done. How impressive is that? Next, we'll hear from Judge Foster Cutoff and the Civil and Family Justice Committee.
Thank you, Justice Lambert. The Civil and Family Justice Committee was scheduled to meet March 3rd, 2023, which was a Friday afternoon, and that was the day the whole state about to go away. So we canceled that meeting and postponed it, and we did meet on March the 15th of this year. We heard work group updates from all three of our work groups, and we had a really great report from the Kentucky advocates. Tamara Best and Melissa Collins came from KYA and talked to us about residential foster care and did a report on that. So that was eye-opening. And we talked about our next steps. Before I introduce the work group people, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Shauna Mitchell. So I can't tell you how wonderful she's been to work with and how on top of things she is. She keeps me in line. It makes my job very easy as chair. So thank you, Shauna. The first work group we're going to hear from today is the Dependency, Neglect, and Abuse Work Group, which is led by the hardest working family judge in Central Kentucky, Judge Marcus Vanover.
The DNA work group has met 3 times. We met January 4th, February 8th, and March 14th. At the initial meeting on January 4th, we had an open discussion around barriers that families are experiencing in accessing services throughout the state. We pulled together kind of a brainstorming session where we identified themes and told the members to prioritize what areas we should focus on. I think the list of themes, we identified about 10 priorities. We polled the members and came up with the top 3 that we really wanted to focus on. At our February 8th meeting, we established those 3 priorities, which were enhancing collaboration with system partners, understanding the role of treatment providers, including limitations and addressing associated barriers, and creating a best practice guide for court and child welfare partners. We then began developing a work plan on how we're going to address these priorities and identify the next steps and the team leads for each of the priorities and observations. So the next steps that we identified for priority area 1, enhancing collaboration with system partners, included to review existing resources and develop a model plan to share with local communities and to ensure that communication about that model plan is spread across to the local communities. This priority area is headed by Christian County Family Court Judge Jason Fleming and Leanna Dowen. They're the leads on that priority area. The next steps for priority area 2, which was understanding the role of treatment providers, are to review the ethical guidelines for different licensures, to develop training and cross-training across disciplines, and to engage in process mapping, and to identify who can participate and in what capacity in the courtroom providing testimony. Melissa Hayden, Andrea Polk, and Miriam Silman are the team leads for our second priority area. The next steps for priority area 3, we're creating a best practices guide for court and child welfare partners. And those include to collect resources to share with the team and to research these existing resources. Mary Carpenter with the cabinet is the lead, team lead for that priority area. At our March 14th meeting, the team leads for each of the priority areas reported out on their progress since the February meeting. Additionally, we've created email threads and sent those to all of our work group members for each priority area so that they'll be able to better communicate with the team leads and to make sure that all of our members are being engaged and offer suggestions and assistance to the team leads so that they're not having to do the work all on their own. Our next DNA work group meeting is scheduled for April 24th. Additionally, I'd like to provide an update on the Upstream project. As you may remember from our December commission meeting, Kentucky will be a pilot site for the Upstream model in partnership with the National Center for State Courts. Upstream is a community-based approach that leverages court resources, judicial leadership, and child welfare agency partnerships to enhance community collaboration throughout the state, also local coordination, community mapping, and action planning. It actually aligns well with efforts already underway by the Department of Community-Based Services with thriving families and safer children. Upstream is based off the sequential intercept model and promotes proactive strategies in the preservation of child maltreatment as opposed to reactive strategies. The National Center for State Courts also presented on Upstream at the February 15th Judicial Engagement Work Group made up of judges, DCBS representatives, and child welfare partners. An Upstream planning team has been formed. On March 15th, we met to discuss Upstream and its alignment with the Thriving Families, Safer Children initiative of the cabinet. On March 21st, we met to complete our readiness assessment with the assistance of the National Center for State Courts and leadership from the Department of Community-Based Services. Completing this assessment provided an opportunity to discuss ideas and receive guidance from the National Center. The discussion we addressed and found that Kentucky is well positioned for this initiative We can have or can easily attain 6 of the must-have features for success with upstream, and we're strongly positioned for the 7 extra features that lead to success shown in the readiness assessment. We will meet again on April 13th to further develop next steps for upstream, which will include messaging, planning for rollout of upstream, identifying facilitators and pilot sites, as well as establishing structure for support and accountability.
Thank you, Judge Vanover. Our next work group is the Guardianship and Commitment Work Group, and that is led by Stacy Kapke, the Kenton County Attorney and the immediate past president of the Kentucky County Attorneys Association.
Thank you. We are not quite as developed yet as some of the other committees. Thus far, we've only had one meeting, which was in February on the 7th. And what became pretty clear is that within our subgroup, we have a lot of wonderful people that have volunteered, but it really is 2 separate issues that are developing. We have a core group of people and practitioners who do guardianships, and then we kind of have a core group who really focus more on involuntary hospitalizations. As county attorney, I do both, so it's easy for me. But it's becoming clear that there's a lot of private practitioners who have questions about adult guardianships, for example, restoration of rights, that perhaps the statute needs to be looked at. We know how to take someone's rights away, but how do they get restored? What's the process? Brought up issues about how a guardianship would impact someone's marriage, and a lot of great questions. So we're going to meet again, and I anticipate that group is really, they've brought up some wonderful questions, and I see us proceeding very quickly. The other group is the involuntary hospitalization. What we've come to realize is we don't have everybody at the table that we need to. We really need to get more law enforcement officers. We need to get maybe some additional sheriff's deputies. So that we need to hear from the mental health providers so that we understand their criteria when they decide whether or not someone's at risk of harm. We want somebody from NAMI, because when it's not law enforcement who's taking them to the hospital and it's a loved one, we need to hear from them and understand their experience, because I think it's probably a lot of times very frustrating. So we're just looking to really kind of develop that committee further and make sure we have anybody there. So if you are aware of anybody that you think fits that, please send them our way. You know what, we don't have anybody from the DPA. So that's our update. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tabke. The last work group for the Civil and Family Justice Committee is the Domestic Violence Work Group, which is led by the Honorable Denise Brown, who's a family judge in Jefferson County, and I believe she is on Zoom. There in the upper left on our screen here at AOC. There she is right there. She's coming to us live from 700 West Jefferson Street in Louisville. So Judge Brown, take it away.
That is true. Thank you all so much, and happy to be here this afternoon. The Domestic Violence Work Group was created to look at the intersection between mental health, behavioral health, substance use disorder, and intellectual disabilities. We plan to cover such topics as domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual violence. One of the focus areas that we are developing and implementing, is to implement a best practices in civil and family courts to ensure appropriate court procedure and responses for individuals, families, and youth in Kentucky. We held our first meeting in February 2023. Of course, opened the meeting and allowed everyone to introduce themselves, and that's when we found out that we have a very diverse array of service professionals who work both with survivors and perpetrators, as well as members who represent different systems across the state, who have volunteered to participate and lend their expertise and time to this group. We provided them with an overview of the Kentucky Judicial Commission on Mental Health, because for many members, it was their first contact with the commission and learning about the work that led up to the establishment of this commission. The overview was followed by a brief presentation by AOC, statewide initiatives to address domestic and interpersonal violence within the court community through the annual VAWA Stop Formula Grant. Lastly, we opened a discussion with the group to discuss barriers that are preventing the effective response to justice involved individuals and families who also experience domestic and interpersonal violence. So some of the common themes that occurred were there are not enough services available and inequitable services throughout the state. And when the services are available, they are different throughout the state. There needs to be consistency across the board. Definite transportation barriers preventing the victims from traveling to the clerk's office to file the protective order petitions or attending court hearings. Language and labeling concerns, especially with regards to the respondents and the defendants. It creates a disconnect to those receiving services like VIP, who have not actually been convicted of crimes, but asked or ordered to take those courses. Fear that mental health and domestic violence assessments may be held against the victims in court, revisiting the court forms through the lens of mental health, behavioral health, and intellectual disabilities. And one other focus area was ensuring petitioners are provided with resources and services from the time they file the protective order petitions to their court hearing dates when they are the most vulnerable. So there were a lot of other barriers that we did discuss, and we are preparing to take some next steps to develop a goal statement for the work group and present a list of barriers to the members of the work group to identify the priorities to work on in the short term and in the long term. Our next work group committee meeting will be March the 30th.
Thank you, Judge Brown. We appreciate your work on that. Justice Lambert, those would be the reports from the Civil and Family Justice Committee work groups. If anybody has any questions. If not, thank you.
Takes a moment to unmute myself on this battery too, so I'm just microphone. For our last committee update, we'll hear from Judge Kevin Mullins with treatment and access.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Mullins, and I'm chairman over the Treatment and Access Committee. I would like to first thank Justice Lambert for her kind words about our Senate Bill 90 program and its inclusion into the National Center for State Courts pilot program. Just briefly on Senate Bill 90, it provides two things that we've never had before. One, it provides us the opportunity to help people, to assist people who would have otherwise received no attention. Number two, it's been very educational for me because we've traditionally sent a lot of people to treatment for substance use disorders. This is the behavioral health component of it has caused us to take a step back and maybe not look at treating the symptoms, but look at treating the causes. Of our participants, approximately 75 to 80% of those participants who are female have self-reported pretty significant childhood sexual experiences. So it's been very educational and informative. In a quick summary, I think Senate Bill 90 is fabulous. I can't talk about Senate Bill 90 without acknowledging and thanking some people who are sitting in this room though. The first person I would like to thank is Van Ingram, who's chairman over the Senate Bill 90 Implementation Council. Van has had a very tough task in getting this process up and running. However, Van has not rested on that task of getting this monumental program up and running. He continues to work on this project here today and making some changes to some unforeseen slight legislative problems. So I do appreciate Van's work on this program and project. I appreciate sitting beside him, Secretary Freelander's assistance in this program. And I guess for a quick summary, I would have to say that his Department of Behavioral Health has shown an all hands on deck approach in getting this program up and running. Another person who I would like to thank here today is Brian Hubbard, who's mentioned he was the executive director of the Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission. Thanks to our generous funding from this commission, it is my opinion that that funding will produce significant positive dividends in the lives of Kentuckians who are justice involved, who are suffering from some type of substance abuse or behavioral health concerns. So we appreciate the funding for this most important project. Also appreciate the administrative office, the courts, who provided us an army of support and sent some of their best talent to assist us. So I appreciate everyone's involvement in the Senate Bill 90 program. I'll talk to you now about the treatment and access. Okay. We've had one full meeting since our last commission meeting. And during that meeting, we tried to set up our framework, our guidelines, what I call our ABCs. And our ABCs seem to be pretty simple, okay? Especially the A, which was acknowledging the problems and barriers that we all face. And those were pretty apparent. And there's a lot of issues that we all know that need to be addressed. And some people kind of refer to it as we need to start from the floor up. And then some people said, no, we need to start from the ground up. And we acknowledge all the problems. The B was easier. We have to believe that we can create a better system. And I think that was shown by everyone's encouragement and involvement in the various meetings and work groups. And C, what I thought was most important, and still do so for the day, is community. I think community partnerships. We have to recognize what programs we have, what is working, what isn't working. How do we get our communities involved in this process? How do we get our communities educated in this process? So to me, my committee is pretty much the foundation of the whole commission. We have 3 different work groups. The first one is the court responses, which is led by Judge Stephanie Burke, who I think had docket commitments and could not be here today. The second is the Strengthening Community Response Work Group, which is led by Wes Butler, who's representing the Kentucky Hospital Association. And the final work group is the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Work Group, which is represented by Melanie Cunningham with NAMI. Where also one thing, just to backtrack a little bit. During our overall committee meeting, we had a presentation by Judge Burke, along with the Department of Behavioral Health, on the assisted outpatient treatment program. And I really liked the format. They had a presentation, and then following that, we had access to their slides and data. And it seemed to be a very educational and a good reference material. So I think in our committee and our work groups, we're going to try to follow that format. Invite someone to attend, have them present, and then distribute access to the material. So that seemed to be a good format in doing things. We're going to try to continue to follow that. In reference where Judge Burke isn't here, I'm going to talk briefly about her court responses work group. They discussed a lot of different items during their work group meeting, but one of the things that they seemed to focus on, and I'm wholeheartedly in agreement, was the need to train court personnel on how to identify someone who's appearing before them, and then see if they suffer from any type of mental illness, substance use disorder, and then how to assist them or refer them out to treatment. So that was a big discussion. With that discussion, there were some talks about requiring certain court personnel to have the mental health first aid training. Okay. Following our commission meeting in December, I happened to have just a casual conversation with Nancy Hill out in the hallway. And Nancy said, we have 2 employees at Operation Unite who's trained on mental health first aid training. We'd love to come to Letcher County and present that to you. I think it was February 24th she came over. The clerk from the circuit clerk's office, some of his deputy clerks, the court security personnel, pretrial services, along with Angie Darsky. And so I guess you can say from the top to the bottom, okay? And it was just a wonderful training. It exceeded any expectations that I had because it was very fundamental and it was very involved and very informed. So we were very appreciative to have that, and we would encourage everyone to look into that or other training. Also during the work group, Melanie Cunningham mentioned that NAMI has a similar, sort of more in detail training called the NAMI provider training. I think it's 15 hours more involved. So I agree that the key for all this is education and training on everyone's part. And also a great thing too about this committee is I realized resources that were sitting available to me that I had no idea that existed. So we were very appreciative, and I think they're on the right idea with the extra training for the court systems because we've historically received none. The other work group we have is the Strengthening Community Response Work Group. Wes is here, and I'll let him go over that with you. Seems like they have the most members, and seems like they have a lot of ideas and a lot of work ahead of them. So I'll turn it over to Wes.
Thank you, Judge Mullins. The Strengthening Community Response Work Group is appropriately named. Our focus in a very broad sense is looking at the various touch points in which community providers, community resources touch upon those that are judicially or justice involved individuals. And as you can imagine, we've got a pretty diverse area of interest, but we also have a unique number of participants within our work group giving a variety of perspectives. The discussions have been wonderful. We've met twice. We've met on January 26th and February 28th. Our third meeting was going to be right before spring break, and I was encouraged not to do that, so we have postponed that meeting until right after spring break on April 10th. I think. April 10th, yes, that would be our third work meeting. We followed Judge Mullins' lead in organizing our approach, much like the ABCs that he's presented. And our first meeting went a little bit over time because we were focusing on barriers that we can see for community response at this point. And we had robust participation. I want to say it was close to 30 members that joined, and the discussion was fascinating. We ran into about a 3-page list, spreadsheet of barriers that we want to explore. But having done that part, our second meeting was then going more into the belief and community response aspect, where we're trying to identify how to respond to those particular barriers. And I thought it would be good maybe just to identify 4 of the observations that came to the top. They're by no means all of the observations that we're addressing at this point, but 4 of them that we spent over the last couple of meetings discussing in some detail. First, we recognized that there was a lack of stable resources, and that's actually worsened since the beginning of the pandemic. That resources were lacking even before the pandemic, but even more so now. So the opportunities for accessing resources has diminished quite a bit. And we also had a really robust discussion about the equitable distribution and allocation of those resources. And it ties into observation 2, where the concept of healthcare deserts throughout Kentucky were identified. And this is something that we're actually going to study a little bit further in trying to understand where resources are particularly lacking, and using some of the available information from the Health Research and Services Administration at the federal level, as well as some other areas to locate medically underserved areas so that we can figure out a little bit more about that. And we had a pretty robust conversation about transportation as well. It consistently came up about having access to healthcare resources is one thing, but actually getting the justice involved individual to the resources was a perpetual problem. So even when the resources are there still needs to be transportation. And our friends at the Department of Medicaid and others can be working with us and helping us try to assess that particular area. The third observation was a general misunderstanding about care capabilities of the various types of healthcare providers. One thing that came up in the discussion was making sure that individuals with particular healthcare needs had access to that in a right sizing type way. That not everyone is going to need acute level care if they're dealing with chronic conditions. Not everyone has a medical need if they're having conditions that don't necessarily implicate a medical need. And trying to understand the variety of resource availability and how to make sure that we're educating the government resources on utilizing those healthcare resources was going to be something that I think is going to be an ongoing aspect of our committee, or our work group. And the fourth thing that came up was the need for more safety and advocacy mechanisms to catch unbefriended individuals before they enter the justice system. There is a significant population of those that really just don't have an access to an advocate, someone that's guiding them and helping them along the way. And it's not until they actually get into the justice system in which they realize that they really don't have an advocate. So we're going to be exploring how to create those interventions earlier in the process, identifying the population in which we can intervene before they actually hit the court system. So those observations have kind of give you a taste of what our work group has been doing, and I'll leave an open invitation. They've been absolutely fascinating discussions to have. So if you're interested, on April 10th, we're going to be convening again. Welcome you to come and join us. If you wish to participate, great. But even if you're just listening in on the discussion, I think what you'll find is truly eye-opening on the community benefits that are out there, as well as the deficits that we need to address. And with that, Judge Mullins, that's my report for the work group.
And one of our final work groups is the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Work Group that's led by Melanie Cunningham.
Thank you. Before I start, I do want to make a comment about Judge Jones. Listen, so I have an employee that had a daughter, suicidal ideation, went to the ER in Louisville. I can't remember which hospital. Went in on a Monday and stayed in the ER till the next Monday. No placement. While she was there, of course, everybody's coming in. It's a germ fest. She gets sick with the virus for about 3 days and is vomiting violently. They won't put her on the peds room, still down in the ER. So I was like, they're gonna have to discharge her and do a partial, what they call a partial hospitalization, PHP, because she can't sit in the ER for 2 or 3 weeks. And I used to work at WellCare, and I started trying to think of some of the places. I was like, well, there's UK and Sam, there's Stoner Creek, and I was like, have them call, and then I started calling places, still set in the ER. Finally, they discharged her the following Monday and just DC'd her home to try to do partial hospitalization. Now, the mom who works for us is sick because she has picked up something and she's in the ER today. So all of this just happened. So I'm just hoping, your work group, and I sit in on the children's, but I won't commit to anything because I'm doing up here with this group. But there's definitely a need for more inpatient. And then she also has autism. And so I think when they were doing the assessments, a lot of places were like, no, because the treatment for a kiddo with autism is going to be different. You have to have your ABA specialist and other people. So there's definitely barriers for kids with autism. And then also there's just not enough beds across the state. And they were looking 200 miles out. They were even looking at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, but they were full. So it is an absolute nightmare if you have a child with SCD and has to be hospitalized because there may be possibility that you're going to sit in the ER for a week. And then they both got sick. And so now the mom is sick and she's in the ER now as we speak. So just a nightmare. And she still really didn't get what she needed. So just want to make a comment that I hope that the work group, that we end up getting some more hospitals that can create units for children to be seen. So, okay, and with that being said, our group works with intellectual disabilities and delays. We met on March 17th, and Judge Mullins was there, and also Mr. Steve Shannon down there. We were a little bit nervous because we thought we were only going to have 6 or 7 people, but we ended up having about what, 10 or 11. And then I've emailed Shauna about maybe 4 or 5 more people. So we connected with someone that I knew from the foster adoptive care system that worked with kiddos, parents with intellectual disabilities and delays. And so she's got a list of people that we're going to add. So we did talk about barriers to youth and adults with intellectual disabilities and delays, and that included a range of services for when they get arrested or out of control, all the way to housing and employment, different things like that. And we decided that we were going to be meeting every month because it's a new group. So we're going to meet the third Friday from 1 to 2:30. And then we also talked about having some additional people from the Medicaid department and also the schools and private providers. People with intellectual disabilities and delays do require some specialty areas and fields. So we definitely want to get some of them on board. And so we don't have any outcomes yet, but I think with the addition of some people that we're bringing on, we'll have goals and outcomes to come. So we're really excited about that group and everybody in there. We had some people that were social workers, and then we're going to have family members. So I think it's going to be a good group. Did you have anything, Steve, that you wanted to share? Yeah. So we're excited about the group, and we'll have more to report at the next quarterly meeting.
Is there any questions about the Treatment Access Committee?
I do see ways, excuse me. The Juvenile Justice Committee, we've been made aware too many times that children with intellectual disabilities are placed in the detention setting. So we're looking at a lot of the same issues juvenile-wise that you all have. So we'll be looking for ways to collaborate with your committee and into ours as well.
Any further questions, comments? Back over to the justice.
Mrs. Thompson, or Judge Thompson.
Just very briefly, usually I sit up here and I'm the quiet one of the group, and normally I'm not the quiet one of the group, but I want to start off by saying just a couple of things. First of all, I've been blessed. This is my 28th year as a judge in Kentucky. I said I had 4 years as a district, 20 years as a family court judge, and this is my 4th year now in the Court of Appeals, and I can tell you, I've never been part of an organization that I've found to be this impressive. It's just amazing to me when I look around the room and I look at the brain trust that's in this room, and it really is. It's so admirable to see each and every one of you. I appreciate how busy your schedules are. I know each and every one of you also have a million different things you could be working on today, but you chose to be here, and we greatly appreciate it. I can tell you that in my time as a judge, especially as a district and circuit judge, the most aggravating and heartbreaking thing I think I ever worked with was those cases where folks with mental health issues were involved. And I can tell you from a judge's standpoint, the thing that was so frustrating is we felt so limited in what we could do to help. I think it's just absolutely terrible, and I understand why judges sometimes have to go to detention in juvenile cases, but I can tell you my personal thought is our mental health patients do not need to be in detention. They need to be somewhere receiving the proper treatment. The other thing as a judge I always found so frustrating was dealing with other agencies and those agencies dealing with us, because so often the guidelines we were given as judges were not the guidelines the other agencies were given. I can remember, I know Secretary stepped out, but with our social workers, I remember one time going back and forth with one of my workers I respected greatly because in a dependency, neglect, and abuse action, I was finding one finding, they wanted something else, and I finally looked at their manual, and their state manual defined neglect and abuse as this, and that wasn't what the law told me I had to apply. So a lot of times it's us interagencies going back and forth and sitting down and having this discussion with each other. What this reminds me of on a larger scale is you have two, I don't want to say old family court judges, two former family court judges sitting up here. But going back, one of the best things we had were our local family court councils, which were made up of individuals from the community that came together and we could discuss for our healthcare providers, our social workers. Look, this is why we can't do it. I used to get extremely frustrated as a judge when I would get a call from the hospital saying, we have someone that needs to be hospitalized on a mental health petition. And I'm going, if your doctor, hospitalize them, keep them there. They go, no, we need you to do it. After a while, I realized why we were going back and forth with that. But from my perspective, I've got doctors I greatly respect are going, we need you to send somebody in to evaluate it. I'm going, but I trust you, doctor. You said they need this. But this is so important bringing us together so we understand it. And I say all that to get to this. If this commission takes care of two of any items you guys have discussed today, what a worthwhile project this would be. It really is. And I applaud Judge Mullins. I know you've been active in this type of field forever, Judge Vano, the family court, all of you. And I apologize, I'm singling out judges, but that's who I usually have worked for the last X number of years. But I just wanted to personally thank you, and I want to thank Deputy Chief Justice Lambert. I promise you, just because you're out there in this committee, she's out there hovering, monitoring this, and I can't imagine the time and effort she's putting into it. So I thank you, and I thank her for the time and effort she's putting into this.
Thank you. And I'm one of these people that I could see a distance with these glasses on, and I was not able to grab them out of my purse earlier to see that the Chief Justice was on Zoom earlier and he had to step away. He sent me a text to tell me he had to step away. I think he made a chat comment echoing my compliment to the committees earlier about all the hard work that's being done. Not only does the chief appreciate the work that's being done by the commission, but also every justice on our court is very supportive of the work that's being done by the commission. And they're all very excited about the summit that's coming up, and hopefully most, if not all, will be able to attend. I had hoped that the chief was going to have the time to stay to give a few closing remarks, but unfortunately, his time obligations were demanding and he was not able to stay. But again, how impressive this shout out of the work has been here today. I got chills a few times. The care deserts that were spoken by Wes, to just realize that we're all sitting in our work groups analyzing our strengths and weaknesses. And there are a lot of strengths. I think we talked about that at our first meeting. We really do have a lot of strengths in this state, and let's not forget those. And I know you aren't forgetting any of those strengths, and using those most efficiently will be a real challenge too, not just identifying the weaknesses. So how exciting this is for all of us to work together in this way. I know our work days are often chaotic, but this is a joyful part of my day to be here with you all. Our next meeting we're going to be absolutely exhausted when we have our next meeting, because it will be on June 2nd. Our feet will be hurting. My hair will be falling. I will probably be very haggard, as all of you all will be too. You all won't be looking very good either. It will be at the end of our summit. And I've seen the room we're gonna be meeting in. I can't remember the name of it. I heard 1,000 different room names, but you will be notified. We will have a debriefing, of the summit and how wonderfully well it's gone. And, I am just very excited about it. We hope to put together some, suggestions for social activities in the evening for you all to attend if you wish to attend in Louisville. I think there will be a movie night for a professional type film to be shown on opioids, I think, right? Pain response or something like that. Tipping the pain scale, maybe. It's the name of the movie. So if you don't want to go out on the town, you don't have to. I'd like to find a way to have a puppy den, to have puppies around, but maybe I can bring the new dog I'm going to surprise my husband with. Maybe I can bring that dog. He has no idea that that dog's coming. Anything else, Shauna, that you'd like to announce?
No. I was just teasing that this is on YouTube. It won't be a surprise.
Oh, well, he doesn't know anything about YouTube. Any other announcements? All right, so continue your good work until May 31st, and we are going to have a fine time in Louisville building a wonderful summit together. Thank you all so very much.